Welcome to the Original Self Podcast. I'm Yvette Dakota, owner of Dakota Life Coaching. I'm a psychology-informed life coach exploring resilience, mindset, and the courage to become your authentic self. This is a space for honest conversations about growth, identity, relationships, and all the messy moments in between that shape who we become. Whatever brought you here today, you're in the right place. Over the years, standing behind a salon chair and coaching individuals, I've noticed something. People rarely come in for just a hair service or a single topic. They come carrying doubts, fears, dreams, and quiet questions about who they are becoming. And underneath all the noise, expectations, criticisms, and pressure, there is still a version of ourselves trying to move forward. Today, I want to explore something that gets in the way of that more often than we like to admit. Let's explore the hidden pattern behind procrastination, how your brain turns discomfort into delay. I want to start by telling you something slightly awkward for myself. I have on more than one occasion cleaned my entire kitchen or reorganized a drawer I've already organized 3 times, and once very proudly alphabetized a shelf of CDs I have not touched in years, all to avoid sitting down to write something I told myself I was going to write. If you're smiling, it's because you have your own version of that story. Maybe yours looks like scrolling instead of starting, or answering every email except the one that actually matters. Maybe it's suddenly becoming very invested in laundry, or binge watching an entire streaming show instead of the one task that's been sitting at the top of your list for weeks. So let me ask you, what does your version of that look like? What is the thing you suddenly become very productive at when you're avoiding something else? Or how long has the real task actually been sitting there waiting for you to begin? The name for this is procrastination, and most of us believe it's a discipline problem, a time management issue, or worse, a character flaw. But that understanding is incomplete, and today I want to give you something more accurate and more useful than the feeling of shame, panic, or frustration when you procrastinate. Let's start by getting precise, because not all delay is procrastination, and collapsing them into the same thing is part of why we end up beating ourselves up for situations that were never in our control. Procrastination has a specific definition. Webster says it's the voluntary delay of an intended action, even when you know that delay will likely make things worse. The word voluntary matters. It means you could act, but you chose, consciously or not, to avoid it. However, it's important to know that it's not a problem of time management, but of an emotion regulation problem. I'll come back to that. I want to point out 3 other types of delay that are not procrastination but deserve their own categories. Purposeful delay. It's intentional. Maybe you schedule something for a time that actually fits your life based on practical reasoning. That's not avoidance. It's discernment, or using proper judgment to determine when is the right time to do what is needed. Next, there's inevitable delay. This is when life intervenes in ways you simply cannot control. Illness, emergencies, a flight delay, or the internet going down in the middle of a deadline. Instead of these reasons acting like character flaws, they are simply circumstances. And labeling them as procrastination adds guilt to a situation that does not deserve it. The last type of delay that is not procrastination is emotional delay. This is where situations become more nuanced because this one overlaps with procrastination without being identical to it. Emotional delay is avoiding something to escape a feeling, such as anxiety, boredom, insecurity, fear of failure, or even the weight of grief. An example of this type of delay is the death of someone you love, making even the most ordinary things temporarily redirected somewhere else. Emotional delay brings short-term relief, but it tends to carry a long-term cost, stress, guilt, reduced performance, and the slow accumulation of things left undone. Before we go any further, let's pause to honestly ask ourselves, am I actually procrastinating, or am I labeling something incorrectly? Is this voluntary avoidance, or is something genuinely in the way? If I'm honest with myself, do I already know the difference? So once we have established that something is actually procrastination, it helps to understand that it doesn't always show up the same way. There are 4 distinct types, and recognizing yours can change how you respond to it. The first and most familiar, even if you may not know the term, is hedonistic delay. It's defined as choosing immediate pleasure or gratification over a long-term goal. The donut over the workout you planned. The show over the project. It is the brain's preference for what feels good immediately over what matters later. Ask yourself this: are you choosing comfort now at the expense of something that matters more later? Another type of procrastination is arousal delay. This is the person who genuinely believes, or has at least convinced themselves, that they work better under pressure. I raise my hand to this. They wait until the last minute for the thrill or rush that urgency creates, and sometimes this is real, but more often it is just a pattern that has become familiar enough to feel like a preference. Think about this. Do you believe you work better under pressure, or is that just what pressure feels like when it's the only gear you use? My answer is yes. Next is irrational delay, which means putting off a task even when you know rationally that the delay will make the outcome worse. There is no pleasure in it, no thrill, only avoidance, despite knowing better. Irrational delay tends to come with the most self-judgment because the logic is obvious, but we do it anyway. Sit with this for a second. If the logical part of you understands the cost, what is it that knowing better still isn't enough to overcome? The last and least recognized procrastination, but perhaps the most compassion-worthy of the 4, is psychological distress delay. This is when you simply do not have the emotional headspace to begin. Not because you don't want to, or because you're undisciplined. It's because something like grief, overwhelm, burnout, or anxiety has used up the capacity that starting requires. Be honest with yourself here. What feeling are you trying not to feel right now? What would happen if you sat with it, even briefly, instead of avoiding it? I read an article with this man called Dr. Timothy Pitchell, an acclaimed psychologist who has spent a significant part of his career researching why we do this to ourselves. His conclusion is deceptively simple. Procrastination has nothing to do with time. It's about emotion. More specifically, it is what happens when the brain prioritizes feeling better right now over doing what we actually intended to do. Which means we're not really avoiding the task. We're avoiding whatever the task makes us feel. And the reason this pattern is so hard to break is straightforward. It totally works. The moment you set something aside, there's a genuine relief. Your body relaxes and the discomfort lifts. Your brain, which is always taking notes, logs that result and now has evidence that avoidance resolves the problem. So the next time that same feeling surfaces attached to the same task or anything that resembles it, your brain offers you the same solution. Eventually, the choice disappears entirely and avoidance simply becomes your default. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The neuroscience behind this is worth understanding. When a task feels threatening, the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting danger, can effectively take the wheel from the prefrontal cortex, which handles rational thinking and decision making. Once that happens, willpower is largely beside the point. You're not dealing with a logic problem any longer, but with a nervous system that has categorized this task as something to escape. Here's a personal example that might resonate. For a long time, the idea of starting this podcast came with a very convincing internal argument. Nobody's going to listen anyway. That thought alone was enough to generate a small but real wave of anxiety, a kind of, preemptive embarrassment. I found the quickest way to make that feeling stop was to simply not start, proving that avoidance works. My discomfort disappeared, that is, until the next time that same idea surfaced and the whole cycle repeated. That is what Pitchell means when he calls procrastination a negative reinforcer. It removes something unpleasant, in this case, the emotion, and that removal becomes the reward. This isn't irrational behavior because it's short term. It's actually quite effective. The problem is accumulation. Because every time we let avoidance handle that feeling, we make it slightly harder to face that task the next time around. Turn these questions inward. What feeling might be attached to the thing you're avoiding? If you remove the task entirely, what emotion would still be there? What is the avoidance giving you right now? And what is it quietly costing you over time? So if the brain is working against us, what actually moves us forward? David Allen, the author and creator of the Getting Things Done methodology, offers one of the most practical answers I've encountered yet. He builds his whole framework around one central insight. Overwhelm and uncertainty are not problems of willpower. They are problems of clarity. Instead of motivation leading the way through them, it identifies the very next physical action. So it's not the project, the goal, not the full picture. It's only the immediate, concrete first step. Such as, I need to work on a presentation. But the physical action needed is only opening the document. Don't start with figuring out the business plan. Start with writing one sentence about what the business does. The specificity is the point because the brain can act on something concrete, but freezes in the face of something formless. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, says that action comes before motivation, not the other way around. We sit and wait to feel ready, to feel inspired, to feel like the time is right. And we are waiting for something that can only be created by beginning. Ali Abdaal, a former doctor turned entrepreneur, likened procrastination to Isaac Newton's first law of motion. That law states that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion. Therefore, by that theory, procrastination is inertia. The task does not get harder the longer we wait, but starting the task does. Once we are in motion, even slightly, the next step becomes easier than it looked from the outside. Which means the question is, what's the smallest possible action I can take right now before the feeling arrives? Not, how do I feel more motivated? Reflect on these questions. What's the very first physical step, not the project, just the first movement. What would it look like to start before you feel ready? That's a good one. Let's talk about self-compassion and how you apply it to procrastination. The connection between self-knowledge and the psychology of procrastination is a layer that's often overlooked, but may be very important. Psychologists Edward Dietschy and Richard Ryan spent years building what they called self-determination theory. That's a framework for understanding what genuinely drives human well-being and motivation from the inside out. I learned a lot about this in school and wrote many papers on it. At the heart of their work are three basic psychological needs, and I want to spend a moment on each one because I think they reveal something important about why certain tasks almost feel impossible to approach. The first psychological need is autonomy. This means the need to feel like your choices are genuinely yours, not performed, not coerced, but freely made. The second is competence, the sense that you're capable of handling what's in front of you, that you can grow within it rather than become defeated by it. The third one is relatedness. So, belonging, connection, the feeling that what you do and who you are actually matters to someone else. So, it's autonomy, competence, and relatedness are the three psychological needs for well-being and motivation. When all three of those needs are present, people tend to function well. When any one of them is missing or under threat, motivation quietly erodes and well-being follows. So when you find yourself stalling on something, it is worth asking which of these three feels most compromised in the moment. Are you avoiding because the task feels forced on you? No autonomy. It's forced. Because you are afraid you're not good enough to do it well? No competence. Defeat. Because it feels like no one will care either way? No relatedness. Connectionless. The avoidance is rarely random, tending to point to something specific. Dr. Kristen Neff, whose research on self-compassion draws from both Western psychology and Eastern, especially Buddhist practice, offers what I think is the most underused tool in this conversation. And it's not more discipline or stricter system or better plan. It is the simple, genuinely difficult act of treating yourself the way you would treat someone you love who is struggling with the same thing. Because the research is consistent on this. Self-judgment does not reduce procrastination. It actually deepens it. When we avoid something and then criticize ourselves for avoiding it, we layer shame on top of the original discomfort. And shame for most people is one of the hardest emotions to sit with. So we avoid that too. The task now carries two layers of feelings we are running from instead of one. The criticism that was meant to push us forward digs a deeper hole. Brene Brown, my favorite researcher on shame and vulnerability, speaks to the idea that procrastination is often less about laziness and more about self-protection. It's actually a way of shielding ourselves from the vulnerability of judgment against trying and falling short rather than acknowledgement for our effort. Understood that way, self-compassion is not a soft option, but the most direct route back to the task. My personal experience with this is many years ago, I had a bad accident which resulted in many broken bones, 6 months off work, followed by another 12 months of physical therapy and very part-time work. In those 18 months of physical healing, I lost control of my hair salon. When I say control, I mean the vibe, the structure, and peace I wanted everyone to feel while spending time and money there. I worked very hard to create an environment that was beautiful, fun, and where anyone could come, regardless of status, looks, money, didn't matter. I hired very talented stylists. I installed systems to help the salon flow effortlessly and was ever present to keep that alive. When I could no longer work or worked way less for all of those months, that feeling disappeared. And when I would walk in, I could feel the stylist not caring about anything but themselves, not coming to meetings and disrespecting everything that I built and worked for. I no longer wanted to be at the salon that I built from the ground up. I no longer cared about all the money I had invested. Still, I kept procrastinating, speaking and telling them how I was feeling because I knew it wouldn't be received with understanding and compassion. It wasn't until I realized that feeling angry and undermined took away my initial reason for building the salon environment in the first place. I slowly realized that my sense of competency and relatedness were either gone or highly diminished. I had just buried it in the shame of self-judgment and avoidance. Once I recognized that, what was actually happening, everything shifted. I had thrown my hat in the ring and put everything on the line. I had taken every risk and absorbed every cost, financially, emotionally, and personally. And I had shown a level of vulnerability that they had never dared to come close to. The shame I was carrying didn't belong to me because I had confused their resistance with my failure. And once I stopped doing that, the clarity came back. The procrastination loosened its grip on me. The vision for the salon resurfaced, and I finally made the changes I had been resisting. Here's a couple of questions to think about. When you catch yourself procrastinating, what is the first thing you say to yourself about it? And would you say that to someone you care about who is struggling with the same thing? There's a final layer that ties this conversation back to the larger thread running through this series. Procrastination, at its most stubborn, is often an identity problem as much as an emotional one. When we repeatedly avoid something, we build a story around the avoidance. I am someone who cannot finish things. I'm a person who always starts and stops. I'm not disciplined. I never follow through. When a story about ourselves gets repeated long enough, unchallenged long enough, it stops feeling like a story and it starts feeling like a fact. But this is what I find fascinating and what I think matters enormously. That story is not only shaped by what we tell ourselves, it's also shaped by what the people around us have come to expect of us. In psychology, this duality is captured in two effects that sit on opposite ends of the same spectrum. The first one is the Pygmalion effect. This is what happens when someone genuinely believes in us and lets us know it, not with empty encouragement, but with a real communicated expectation that we are capable. Studies show that belief alone can shift performance. When someone holds a high bar for us and makes that visible, something in us tends to reach for it. The exact opposite direction is called the Gollum effect. Don't say things about Precious. When doubt is the message, spoken or unspoken, direct or delivered through a telling silence, we tend to shrink to fit it. The low expectations have a way of becoming self-fulfilling, not because we're weak, but because the nervous system is extraordinarily sensitive to what the people around us believe we are worth. I think about this not only in terms of what other people project onto us, but in terms of what we project onto ourselves. The question we're sitting with is not only what others have expected of you, but which of those expectations you have quietly made intrinsic. And is the voice driving your avoidance actually yours, or does it belong to someone who decided a long time ago what you were and were not capable of. So here's what I want to leave you with. The next time you catch yourself avoiding something that matters, try getting curious before getting critical. Ask yourself this: what feeling is this task asking me to sit with that I haven't yet permitted myself to feel? What need, autonomy, competence, or relatedness feels most at risk right now? And what is the smallest possible physical action I could take before the feeling resolves that would put me in motion? You do not need to feel ready. You do not need the whole picture. You do not need to have conquered the fear. You just need to identify one concrete next step and take it before the amygdala gets the final word. The task is not the enemy. The feeling underneath it is not the enemy. The only thing working against you is the unexamined pattern of using avoidance to manage discomfort that would actually pass if you move toward it rather than away. And patterns, once seen clearly, lose some of their grip. Not all of it, not immediately, but some. And some is a starting place. Let this final question land. What is the one thing you have been putting off that, if you're being honest with yourself, matters to you more than almost anything else on your list? And what is the very first physical step, not the whole thing, just the first movement, that you could take toward it this week? Not because the fear will be gone, but because your original self has been waiting for you to decide that it's worth the risk. I believe it is, and so are you. Thank you for listening to the Original Self podcast. If these reflections resonate with you and you'd like to explore your own growth, you can learn more about my coaching at dakotalifecoaching.com.